Hi everyone. I'm a PhD student in my first year at UCL. First, I'm also research engineer at XRPL Commons, and this is about the formal framework for decentralized finance application DeFi apps in heterogeneous blockchain environments. Okay, so as we all know here, blockchain appears to become an alternative for traditional finance. But now that they try to implement this solution, this technical solution, still face some issues. Of course, everyone heard about scalability, but there are also many concerns. I'm working on interoperability, which I consider essential to build the future of blockchain. And even as native crypto users, we all faced once this problem. We want to access one specific environment, one blockchain, to use specific tools, and there is a lot of frictions. It's very difficult. All right, so that was a quick introduction. I will first talk about blockchain interoperability, a quick reminder of what is blockchain interoperability. Then I will talk in depth about my research, my goal, the roadmap, and finally, what are the next steps. What is blockchain interoperability? First, we can define interoperability as the ability of two or more software components to cooperate despite difference in languages, interfaces, and execution platform. And the very first use case for that was aircrafts, because interoperability became critical for the passenger system. Then we can specify interoperability for the blockchain as the ability to share and access information across different blockchain networks without intermediaries, ensuring consistency and reliability. The very first question that we ask when we're looking at blockchain interoperability is at which layer do we want to operate? The first one that everyone, as researchers, as engineers, the first one that we're thinking of is the technical layer. So these bridges, this architecture that allows us to connect heterogeneous environments. But there are many other layers that are as much important, and I'm thinking of the application layer. So let's say that we have two apps that are within the same ecosystem, the same blockchain environment. Let's say Intify and Uniswap and OneInch, and one day they want to start to collaborate. If they don't have the same DeFi primitive, even at the technical level, it will be very difficult to collaborate. So when we're talking about blockchain interoperability, we also have to consider the application layer. And the last layer that we often miss is the business layer. If we don't have the same definition, these services, blockchain services, or even in DeFi, so it's more about semantics and taxonomy. Second question that we will ask is, what do we want to bridge? What is the object of interoperability? The first object that researchers started to look at was assets, and then with vulnerability, with smart contracts, they started to think of data in general. But actually, assets are more restrictive and more difficult to bridge because you have to ensure the value, the integrity, the security of this bridge, and it's very critical. And finally, the last question is, what is expected? It might be just asset bridge, so same asset, the same value to another chain, or a more complex DeFi action, such as asset swap. You have one type of asset on one chain and you want another type of asset on another chain. And the last outcome that we can expect, and I found probably the most interesting, is state synchronization between two chains, two smart contracts, between two DeFi applications, for example. And all of these questions, and mostly the last one, is very important because it will largely influence what kind of bridges do you want to implement, what kind of architecture are you going to build, and because we're going to see that there are always trade-offs. Many people work on these different architectures, and we have this huge contribution in 2021 by Belchior team in Lisbon. And starting from this contribution, we have almost every year a new contribution building on top of this one, like updates. And I hope that during my research time, I will also make a contribution on top of these ones. What we can see is that asset interoperability has been widely studied. We probably that you heard about notarization, so a group of people in charge of looking at the transaction, executing the transaction on the other chain, HTSC, hashtag contracts, which was one of the first implementation, wrapped assets, light clients, adapter signatures, and KPs, of course. A big picture of this different architecture and how they work. Actually, the industry still faces limitation, mostly in decentralization, security, and liability. And what we often see as the main consideration are the integrity of the asset transfer, asset bridge, and also security, because bridges are first target for attackers in our one of the first target for the attackers in our industry. But there are a lot of other considerations to have in mind: privacy for users, trustability for regulation, and of course, scalability of the solution. And one of my assumptions,
the reason why they are under the iceberg is because the way that you differentiate between the two groups.
Yeah, because we don't talk that much about privacy, traceability, and scalability. But about the rich solutions, we don't think that sometimes the solution can support, such as the proofs, can support, I don't know, 1,000 transactions at force. And I believe, I mean, one of my assumptions is that one of the reasons why this limitation still exists after 5-6 years of research and work in the industry is that we have a lot of different solutions, specific solutions for bridging to bridge assets, data, but we're solving technical problems without thinking of an entire the apps, cross-chain the apps. And this is an important research gap. One of the consequences is that when someone wants to develop work on cross-chain the app, he has to interact with multiple intermediaries. He increases his failure risk and surface exposure for attacks. There are no interoperability at the application level and business layer, as we said earlier. And it's even worse in the context of heterogeneous blockchains, such as the XRPL ledger and EVM blockchains. So here is mainly my research problem, and my goal is first to look at what are the stakeholders who are involved in this fragmentation, because I think that probably there are some actors that are not for the interoperability between different blockchains. We are focusing on scalability. We have interoperability solutions, so we have to clarify who are involved and what are the different limitations that they face. The second main priority is to identify at which layer do we want to operate, as we said earlier, and what do we want to make interoperable in blockchain the apps. As we are working on heterogeneous blockchain environment, there is a we want to make a contribution on formalization because we have different concepts, different implementation for the same concept. And finally, for the next year, probably next year, prototype implementation, security and validation, really wants to make a solution that we will be able to generalize for different blockchains, not just for my environment, which is the XRP ledger. So the final dream outcome will be a framework for cross-chain DApps across heterogeneous blockchains. Many researchers already worked on this topic. One of the first huge contribution was Hyperservice in 2019, that they faced this scalability and adoption problem. In terms of formalization, we got a contribution for an ontology by Besançon in 2022, and for the last few years, we got we got very important contributions providing specific solutions that are allowing cross-chain DApps interoperability. Tool setup will be the XRP ledger and EVM blockchains in general, and I will work on Ethereum. And I already had my first contribution. We did an analysis of different bridges existing between the XRP ledger and EVM chains. What we saw is that so with the conceptual analysis of the internal ledger and the proposals that we made for improvement of the protocol by Ripple. And we also did an analysis of conviction bridge in the environment. There are sets like Stellar and Guarantees. What we saw is that there are always trade-offs. For example, Stellar is way more decentralized than the others, but face difficulties in terms of latency and latency management. And New Intense is very efficient for the heard about this September and November, but it's very efficient, almost insane. But it's huge consideration in terms of decentralization. There are two companies. One company in charge of SDK and efficiency. What are the next steps? We're working on formalization, trying to first match the different concepts, how they are implemented to the XRP ledger in blockchains, mainly Ethereum. And for the next years, implementing the prototype and trying to generalize this solution for all the types of blockchains. I think that most will face different challenges. The first one is a technical one. It's been almost 10 years that people are working on abilities, and Ripple was one of the first with the InterLedger to start this projects. So there is always trade-offs, and we will have to deal with that. I don't think that during the 30 years research we will be able to have the solution that will answer all these trade-offs, but still we'll try to do all of this, check the apps. The second thing that we try to keep in mind, and this is our focus right now, is to make sure that we will be relevant for the industry and the research, to make sure that our contribution is useful for the community, blockchain community, and research community. Adoption challenge, we got Hyperservice, they did a huge contribution, but very difficult to implement for the companies in the industry, and they have concerns that we have to match with our solution. And finally, in security, because as we said, bridges are the first target for hackers. Okay, so my research is about bridging the gap between blockchain interoperability, cross-chain for cross-chain DApps in the heterogeneous blockchain environment, mostly in DeFi. Our next contribution will be survey and stakeholder assessment. Next year, we will work on formalization, making a prototype, testing, and generalized solution for other types of blockchain. And then framework for constraint gaps and evolutions of chain value. So here are the resources, the references, sorry. The first slide is about different surveys, then the architectures that we saw in this tab, and finally the survey, different contribution for cross-chain use. Thank you for listening.